All right, today, welcome back everyone to Those Who Give a Damn podcast. I am your host, Dr. Duvalier Malone, and today's conversation comes at an important time in American history. On August 28th, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. stood on the Lincoln Memorial to his iconic dream speech, I Have a Dream. More than 6 decades later, we are still wrestling with some of those same questions about race, hate, division, equality, and what does it truly mean to humanity? My guest today has spent decades confronting those questions. Daryl Davis is a musician. He is an author. He is an activist. And I am so excited to have an opportunity to speak with him today on some of the most, what I call the most challenging times I've seen in my lifetime. And Daryl, you've lived much longer than me. And so I want to really just shut up and let you talk, right? Welcome to Those Who Give a Damn podcast. And thank you so much for doing this for me today. I want you to just really tell my audience, how did you get into this work? I always say that we all have lenses in which we experience the world to really craft us to be the people that we are, the things that we get involved in. Tell us your story today.
Sure, I appreciate that. Do I look that much older than you? Okay. So,
Daryl, I looked up your age before I got on here.
okay. So in all transparency, I'm 68 years of age. But I had a unique growing up experience. My parents were in the U.S. Foreign Service, which means State Department, American Embassy. So I began traveling around the world in 1961 at the age of 3. And how it works is you get assigned to a country for 2 years. And then after the assignment, you return back home here to the States for a few months, maybe a year, and then you're back overseas to another country for 2 years. So back and forth were the formative years of my life. My first introduction to school, which was kindergarten, was overseas. I did kindergarten, first grade, third grade, fifth grade, seventh grade in different schools in different countries. And I did the in-between grades back home here in my own country. So the interesting thing that most Black kids and white kids, my peers, talk about American kids, did not experience that I did was diversity at a very early age. To me, it was the norm. Like I said, my first introduction to school was overseas. My classmates, whether it was kindergarten, first grade, third grade, fifth grade, seventh grade, were from all over the world. Because this is in the 1960s, you understand. Because anybody who had an embassy station where we had our U.S. embassy, all of their kids could attend school. Those little girls sitting over here to my left, he might have been from Nigeria. This kid over here from Japan, kid in front of me from Russia, kid behind me from Germany. If you were to open the door to my classroom, stick your head in and look, you say, oh my goodness, this looks like a United Nations for little children. Because that's exactly what it was. But every time I would come back home here in my own country, I would either be in all Black schools or Black and white schools, meaning the still segregated or the newly integrated. And there was not the amount of diversity in our country and our schools back then in the 1950s that I had overseas. So literally, I was living about 10 years ahead of my time because that kind of diversity would not come through our country, that early. Despite the fact that Brown versus the Board of Education in the Supreme Court desegregated schools 4 years before I was born. I was born in 58, and that Supreme Court decision was made in 1954. Schools did not integrate overnight. It took years, sometimes decades, right? Even today, in 2026, in some parts of our country, we're still struggling with integration. So I was already prepared for it. So one of the times when I came back, I was 18. I was in the 4th grade. 1968, I was going to a newly integrated school. This was the first year it had been integrated, 1968. There were 2 Black kids in the entire school, me in the 4th grade and a little girl in 2nd grade. So consequently, all of my friends were 4th and 5th graders, and they were white. So several of my male friends were members of the Cub Scouts, and they invited me to join, which I did. I was the only Black Scout anywhere in the area. And this was in Massachusetts, about 8 miles outside of Boston. So there was a parade with the Girl Scouts, with the Brownies, the Girl Scouts, the Cub Scouts, 4-H, different organizations. I'm the only black participant. The streets are blocked off, the sidewalks are lined with white people waving and cheering, having a good time. We reached a certain point in this parade route, and suddenly I'm getting hit with soda pop bottles and cans and small debris from the street. Now, keep in mind, I know you're very young, you went around back in the 60s, but soda pop bottles back in the 60s were made out of glass, not this plastic we have today. All right. So those things hurt. But anyway, I couldn't see what was happening. And I saw a couple of kids, perhaps a year or two older than me, and a couple of adults who may have been their parents, who were throwing things. And my first thought was, because I had no precedent for this behavior, my first thought was, oh, these people over here, they don't like this thing. That's how naive I was. It wasn't until my scout leader came running and they covered me with their body, with on scout leaders. That I saw no other scouts were getting this special protection. So now I'm trying to figure out, these people are targeting me, not the scouts. What had I done? And I'm trying to find, what did I do?
Mhm.
And I kept questioning my scout leaders who were not protecting anybody but me. And they're all they do is kind of shush me and move me along. Tell me, keep moving, everything good. I kept moving. They never answered my question as to why this was happening. At the end of the parade, I went home. My mother and father were at home. They were not at the parade. And were putting band-aids on me and asking me, how did I fall down? And they're all straight. I told them I didn't fall down. I told them what had happened. They thought I'd fall down. Well, the first time in my life, my mom and dad sat me down and explained to me what racism. At the age of 10, Valier, I never even heard the word because
Wow.
it did not exist in
Wow.
my sphere. And that's the growing up that I had that most Americans, black or white, did not have. So when this happened to me, it was a total shock. But we've already experienced camaraderie, adoration, all the friendship with people who look like the people who are causing me harm. So therefore, I could not paint everybody with a broad brush. And every time I go back overseas, I was treated very well. Every time I come home, there would be some racist incident, against me. So the question became, how can you hate me when you don't even know me? And how is it that I can travel all over the world and be treated better by people rather than my own fellow Americans in my own country? That's how that journey started.
Absolutely. Thank you for sharing. That's powerful. You've done something that many Black people, myself included, will find very difficult. You are willing to sit across from people who belong to other organizations around other beliefs, and that's powerful. But your story that you've just shared makes sense. What goes through your mind when you walk into one of those conversations? Is it much of it based on how you were raised, and because you were raised in that environment, probably much you are it I'm envisioning that this is probably normal, right? To be able to embrace and be with people that doesn't look like you or sound like you, and be okay with that. So much of our society now is so divided. What would be your solution to, like, how do we get from this just divided state that we're in? Like, our country is very polarized, very divided, and people who talk about unity and working across the aisle, sometimes they get shorn away.
Yeah. Well, to your point, I understand you would have difficulty, and a lot of your peers, especially older peers, may have difficulty. If I had never traveled and grew up here in my own country, maybe I would feel the same way you did. But I can tell you something, between traveling with my parents as a child and me traveling as an adult, I'm a professional musician. and that's short. So I played all 50 countries in this country. I've been, when you combine my childhood travels, my adulthood travels, I've been to 65 countries on 6 continents. So I have been exposed to a wide variety of people of all religions, cultures, colors, ethnicities, you name it. And all of that is shaped who I have become. All right. One of my favorite books of all time is by the author Mark Twain. And Mark Twain said, travel is fatal to prejudice, bigotry, and narrow-mindedness. And many of our people live solely on these accounts. Broad, wholesome, charitable views of men and things cannot be acquired by visitating in wonderful of the earth all one's lifetime. And that is so true. The more you know people, the closer you come, And I can tell you this, Molly, no matter how far I've gone from my country, the US, whether it's very close, right to Canada, right next door to Mexico, or across the Atlantic Ocean, across the Pacific Ocean, to the other side of the planet, every single person I have encountered is a human being. We may not look at the same, speak the same language, worship the life. We don't even worship well, but we're all human beings. And
Hmm.
as such, every human being on this planet, can't speak for other planet, but everyone on this planet wants these same 5 core values in their lives. Everyone wants to be loved. Everyone wants to be respected. We all want to be heard. We all want to be treated truthfully and fairly. And we all want the same things for our family as anybody else wants for their family. And we can learn to apply to those 5 core values or any of those 5 values when we find ourselves in an adversarial situation or in a culture or society in which we're uncomfortable or unfamiliar. I'll guarantee you that your navigation of that situation, that culture, that society will be much more smooth, much more productive, and much more positive. And that's how I conduct myself when I deal with these dedicated members, the neo-Nazis, the white supremacists, racists, etc.
Wow, wow, that's so profound, Daryl. One of the things I want to shift to is the anniversary of the March on Washington that's happening, and we know that August 28th is a significant, day. I always think about, August 28th, 1955, right? Emmett Till was murdered in Mississippi. August 28th, right? We are going to be celebrating 1963 was the March on Washington. And so many around the country, my age and younger people are saying that, why are we marching? It's time for us to do something different. And I want to start with that. What do you say to people that say that the March on Washington today that's going to happen this weekend, they think it's theatrics. They want something more tangible. They don't understand, why are we marching? Like, why are we not doing something more tangible? Why we're not feeding people that are hungry? Why we're not having town hall meetings? Why we're not holding our political leaders accountable? Why are we having this theatrics of a March on Washington? I understand the significance of it. I'll be there Saturday, but many don't. Talk to those people.
Sure. Okay. Well, the significance of it is very important, very symbolic. Okay, and we're paying tribute for a man who moved the country forward. It's not as far forward as it should be by any means, but he did more in his way to move it forward than anybody else. And this march is in tribute to him. Regarding the people who are saying, why aren't we doing anything more tangible? They do have a point. The march is to recognize this 2 things. One, the tribute to Dr. King, who helped move things forward, helped bring segregation, to an earlier end. Had he not been doing what he was doing, especially with the boycott and other things, but also to bring attention to the public of this lost history of segregation and let them know that racism still exists in this country. So that's the significance of it. But to the younger people's point, yes, we need to do something more tangible because if you keep doing the same thing over and over the exact same way, the law of physics tells you you'll get the exact same result. So yes, we do need to hold our leaders accountable. We do need, something else to move us further.
What is your message on Saturday, Derek? Because I believe, are you speaking on Saturday?
Yes, I am.
Yes. So what is your message? What would be? Can you give us a sneak preview of what you're going to be speaking about on Saturday?
Sure. I'm going to be speaking about a promissory note that this country promised to all people. Okay. We were colonized and we got our independence from Great Britain in 1776 on July 4th, 4th of July. That's all we celebrated today. Thomas Jefferson wrote the Declaration of Independence in 1776. This is 2026, 250 years later, it's our birthday. In 1776, in our Declaration of Independence, he said, Thomas Jefferson, all men are created equal. All right. Almost 100 years later, in 1863, Abraham Lincoln said the same thing in his Gettysburg Address. All men are created equal. 30 years after that, in 1892, Francis Bellamy, who wrote the Pledge of Allegiance, and every American since 1892, at some point in their life, has held their hand over their heart, kissed the flag, and gave the Pledge of Allegiance, part of which says, one nation, indivisible, under God, with liberty and justice for all. Now, here we are 250 years after our freedom from Great Britain, 100 years after the Abraham Lincoln's Gettysburg Address, which was many years later, 1963. All right? Here we are 250 years after our freedom. We're still polarized, divided, and we're not indivisible as the pledge says. All men are not considered created equal in this country. And so why is there not liberty and justice for all? We were guaranteed the pursuit of life, liberty, and happiness.
Absolutely. Let me ask you this. What have we done with Dr. King's dream, in your opinion?
We've stepped all over it.
Well, tell me more. What do you
Well,
mean?
he has given us a template,
Mhm.
and he rallied the troops. Right? When he passed, people tried to carry it on, but we had people who went in different directions, and we lost sight of that vision, of that dream. We now need to renew that dream. We are in a bad place now. We have somebody who thinks he's king. He's an authoritarian. He's a racist, narcissist. Not me necessarily. Or people like you and I were forced. On slavery. But white people came here because they were fleeing the king of England, who did not allow them to worship as they chose. He wanted them to worship him as a king. And we're having deja vu, all right, 250 years later, with who we have currently, who thinks he's leading this country, he and his administration. So, we need not lose sight of why this country was founded and the promissory notes that we were given in 1776 in our Declaration of Independence, and our President's Gettysburg Address, and in Francis Bellamy's Pledge of Allegiance. Why have those promissory notes not been fulfilled?
Absolutely. And we see that with the number of African American women who are currently unemployed in our country, right? When you say we need to renew the dream, what does that look like in tangible forms? And Daryl, the reason why I'm framing these questions like this is because a lot of my audience that will hear this is the next generation of leaders, young people who will hear this. And sometimes they have a hard time with sound bites that we talk about and how we kind of philosophize these topics and conversations. And what they saying is pretty much what Congressman John Lewis said on his speech, right? We want jobs. We want a better America, and we want it now, right? And John Lewis was very young when he spoke at the March in Washington. What do you say to young people? What does that dream look like in reality? Because you got young people who are coming out of school and they can't find jobs. You have African American women who are unemployed. You have artificial intelligence that is entering a society in which young people are afraid of their future. What does the workforce look like? We have corruption at every level of the government. And so what does renewing the dream look like in tangible in reality here?
Okay, what it looks like is we have to go back and revisit history because we don't know where we are unless we know where we came from. We
Hmm.
don't know where we're going unless we know where we are. Okay, and history is that or where we're beginning to see history repeat itself with a president who is removing names of black generals, military people, and women, removing things out of the world's largest Black History Museum because it became the slavery. Guess what? Slavery did exist. Removing it is not going to erase its existence. You can take down the Holocaust Museum; it's not going to erase the Holocaust. All right. So this is what's happening. It's why we we need to educate these young people so that history is not lost and rewritten forever. And that's one of the ways of being able to dream. Go back and revisit Dr. King.
Absolutely. You know, Dara, one of the reasons why I'm in this work is my grandmother. She was a civil rights leader in Mississippi, and she told me the stories of Medgar Evers, Emmett Till, and how they fought to get the right to vote and why it's so important to vote in every single election. And so, to your point, I do agree that we have to educate the next generation of leaders and young people about their history so that they won't repeat their history. Absolutely. And let me ask you this, Dara. When we think about the biggest issue that's facing our country now, you've traveled all around the world. What would you say is the biggest issue that is facing our country now politically?
Race. Okay? And I'll tell you one. I learned this back in 1982. I just graduated college 2 years prior. I graduated college in 1980. I met this fellow in 1974 when I was age 15. He was the head of the American Nazi Party. The American Nazi Party was formed about 35 minutes from where I'm sitting right now. I'm sitting in Silver Spring, Maryland. It was formed in Arlington, Virginia, right across the Potomac River from Washington, D.C., by a fellow named George Lincoln Rockwell. George Lincoln Rockwell was murdered by one of his own Nazis. The Rockwell's right-hand guy to go to the organization. His name was Matt Cole, Koehl. Well, in 1974, Matt Cole came to my high school as the head of the American Nazi Party and spoke to our class. You can never do that today because they wouldn't allow that. I'm glad they allowed the platform, and I wish
Mhm.
they would allow it today so people could be more educated about what needs to be done about this kind of thing. All right, but when you hide it and deny people a platform, they will find a place to speak, and this is what we're seeing now. Anyway, that Cole stood in front of the class espousing the views of white supremacy. He pointed at me and pointed at another black kid in the class and said, "We're going to ship you back to Africa." And then he did a sweeping motion across the room like that, said, "All you Jews out there are going back to Israel." And I just sat there looking at it, like, what on earth are you talking about? And one of my classmates said, "Well, they live here. What if they don't want to go?" And Matt Cole said, "Oh, they have no choice. If they do not leave voluntarily, they will be exterminated in the upcoming race war." That was the first time I heard the term race war. Right? So that put me on a trajectory. It reinvigorated my pursuit to find out more about racism after I had that incident at age 10 with people throwing lots of bottles at me. And I formed that question: how can you hate me? You don't even know me. Now I got this guy who hates me standing right in front of me telling me he's going to shoot me back to Africa. So I'm revitalized to pursue this, right? When I graduated college, the first thing I did was go looking for Matt. I found him. He did not, he did remember me. He remembered the school, he
Hmm.
remembered me. And we had a conversation. He did not tell me very many true things. He lied a lot. But one thing he did tell me that was true was this. This is in 1982 when I had this conversation with him. He told me that white supremacists were fearful of the year 2042. And I asked him to explain. And he explained how the U.S. secrets were taken every decade, so forth. I've been following him, and he is 100% correct. He lied about a lot of other things, but he's 100% correct on this. When I'm 60 years. When I was a child, first born back in the late 50s, the Black population in our country was 12%. Native American Indians, 1%. Latino Hispanic Americans, 2%. Asian Pacific Islanders, 3%. Whites were like 86, 87, right? Every decade, this has happened. It is well predicted in the year 2042, this country will be 50-50. 50% white, 50% non-white. Between 2045 and 2050, it's going to flip, and whites will be the minority. There are plenty of white people who don't care. They say, hey, no big deal. It's evolution. What's the problem? But there is a slice of that population that does care, and those are the ones that I deal with. And they tell me, Daryl, I don't want my mentors to be brown. They call it the browning of America, or white genocide, miscegenation. And this is why we're seeing all these groups pop up. I've been doing this kind of work now for 47 years. And when I first started, it was just the KKK, neo-Nazis, and white Palestinians. Today, you got the KKK, neo-Nazis, the white Palestinians, the Patriot Front, the Proud Boys, the Oath Keepers, the Vanguard, on and on and on. And they're
Hmm.
all saying, can you join us? We're going to take back our country. The problem is, the last census taken was 2020. The next one will be 2030. In 2020, the white population in this country was only 59%. This is happening, okay? We have not grown. Native Americans remain at 1% in 2020. Asian Pacific Islanders have more than double. Well, double. That's about 6%, 5.96%. Black people are 12.9%. Let's say 13. Latino Hispanic Americans are more than 12 people, 17.7%. If you take just 12% Black or 13% Black plus 17% for Latino Hispanic, that right there is 29% non-white. You're old enough to know the term white flight. Young people never heard that. We don't what is white flight? Because the color of the American landscape has changed so much that
Hmm.
anywhere you go now, there's already somebody there who doesn't look like you. There is no more white. You can't go find a white neighborhood anymore, right? So people are pushing out about it. And once you sat on the throne of power for 4 years, or for 400 years, you don't want to get on. And now that throne is coming down to the level of the common people, and pretty soon it's going to fall below. So these people, these groups, are putting out propaganda. Come join us to win. We're going to take back our country. On July 4th this year, who marched in Washington, D.C., of white supremacist group, 400 strong, right? And saying, we're going to take back our country, reclaim America. You don't have to ask them what they want. They're telling you what they want. They have not grown since the Civil War or since the Revolutionary War, for
Hmm.
that matter. So we need to educate our young people as to what's going on, because history will repeat itself if you allow it to do so.
Hmm. Absolutely. Let me ask you this, Daryl. Do you think you will see a woman president of the United States in your lifetime?
I believe so, yes.
Do you think Kamala Harris should run for president of the United States again?
I think any woman who wants to run for president should run, and people will decide. I don't believe that people decided on this last person.
Why
I
not?
believe I believe it was manipulated. Now, does he have a lot of followers? Yeah, that's absolutely no question. Okay, but I don't believe that they all voted.
Absolutely. Okay. What are your
Just like
thoughts?
the first election was manipulated. He lied to the public. He tried to get a voting commissioner to give him 11,000 votes, whatever.
Yeah. Do you think that we'll see the President of the United States call for a national emergency on voting to interfere with the midterm election?
It's quite possible. He is a war criminal. He belongs behind bars. He he's to be tried and proven guilty because you are innocent until proven guilty in this country, except with the IRS. But he needs to face reality and face his accusers. And if he's found guilty, he needs to pay the price.
What is your message to the American people ahead of the midterm election?
Stop voting for one person and start voting for the entire country. Go for somebody who's going to help the country, not help themselves.
What is your message to the next generation ahead of the midterm election?
Despite what they've heard and they may think, every vote counts unless it gets manipulated. So yes, your vote counts. Because you don't like somebody, well then vote against him or her. Or run for office yourself. But don't
Absolutely.
sit back and do nothing and then expect something out of it.
Absolutely. My last 2 points here is we always ask each guest, why do you give a damn?
Why do I give a damn? Because my parents gave a damn. And because they gave a damn, I don't have to ride in the back of the bus. I don't have to drink from a separate water fountain. I can sit next to a white person in the movie theater. I can eat in any restaurant I want to eat at because they gave a damn about the future of the generation that came after them. Me being one of those. So isn't
Absolutely.
it only right that I give a damn about people who come after me?
Absolutely. I will say this as I've been reflecting on August 28th. I had an opportunity to interview Congressman John Lewis. Back then, Daryl, I had a radio show. So you know how you change with time radio, then the podcast, again, time just changed. And I was in his Atlanta office interviewing him for the 50th anniversary of the March on Washington. And I would never forget it. At the end of the interview, he closed the interview out with saying, for your generation, it is so important that when you see something that is not right, that is not just, you have a more obligation to find a way to get in the way and make some noise for change.
That's right.
And I've been thinking about that with everything that's going on in the world. And, and in that time when we were speaking, the world was bad, but not as bad as it is now. And I said, I feel like he was preparing me and my generation for what we would see in our lifetime. And so that is just, I've been reflecting on that as we prepare for Saturday. The last thing I want to ask you is, what is one of the most memorable moments of the I Have a Dream speech for you that really just settles and it just sits in your spirit for a while? I share with you what Congressman John Lewis told me, but that just always settles with me. What is settling with you as you prepare for Saturday?
Okay. There were a lot of memorable things that he said during that speech. The one that sits with me, as you put it, is, and I'll paraphrase it. He said that he had a dream that one day the sons of former slave owners will sit down at the table of brotherhood with the sons of former slaves. And that's exactly what I've been doing, sitting down with KKK members, having dinner with them, breaking bread with them, so they can see something different. And I've been successful at doing that. And as a result, I have tons of robes and hoods and swastika flags and all kinds of racist and supremacist paraphernalia and memorabilia. They have given to me and left that ideology. So I hope that when I'm looking at Dr. King's name come to a reality, at least in that regard.
Absolutely. Daryl, thank you so much for joining those who give a damn. Truly, you're the epitome of the message that I always tell people when I travel and speak around the country, that we are so much more alike than we are different. It really just takes us sitting together and finding those commonalities. And when people see the humanity in you and others, you have the ability to change their perspective, because I feel like racism is something that is taught, right? And so I've just really enjoyed this message.
Thank
Um,
you. You know, you ask, what do we have to do going forward? I know, a lot of people don't know. And if they do know, they don't learn it until they get into college. And by then, of course, their brains are pretty locked and they may accept it or may not accept it. Your DNA, DNA, everybody's DNA, whether it's over in China, whether it's in Alaska, doesn't matter. Everybody's DNA is 99.9% the same. All right. That needs to be taught. There is no such thing as racism. There is no white race, black race, Hispanic race. Race is a man-made construct. There is only one race, and that's the human race. Within the human race, there are different cultures, there are different colors, ethnicities, etc. There's only one race. That's why 99.1% of everyone's DNA is the same. That needs to be taught, not in college. It needs to be taught in elementary school. Of course, I don't want to use the word dumb it down, but you know what I'm talking about. We'll put it in terms that young people can understand. And as they matriculate from elementary to middle school to high school, you begin adding more things. By the time they get to college, it's pretty clear cut. That will reduce racism in the future when they're taught from an early age that we're all the same. There's no difference between a black Chevrolet Impala or a red Chevrolet Impala the same year. They both are going to run the same. All you got is the color on the body of the.
Daryl, thank you so much for sharing. And I agree. We have to move in that conversation. Daryl, this will not be our last conversation. I feel like
All right.
you have so much to say to my young people, and I will
No, no, keep
definitely
going.